now in Cape Town. Now, the Arch played a central role in fighting the apartheid regime to bring liberation to South Africa. Now, that's the message from Unisa's Vice-Chancellor, Professor Puleng Lenkabula. Professor Lenkabula joins me now to reflect on his legacy. Professor, thank you very much for your time. I read through your statement, and as a past alumni, you spoke quite highly of the Arch. Please talk to us about what his legacy reflected.
Thank you very much, Namfundo, for inviting me to share and reflect on the life of Archbishop Tutu. I first want to state that many people engage on the life, legacy and work of Archbishop Tutu from the basis of the practice of calling for justice, for anti-apartheid, as well as the justice and ecological justice issues that he raised. A lot is not said about his scholarly work and the books that he wrote in advancing the epistemological ideas around decolonization. The second aspect that I think is lost in the discussion is the fact that Archbishop Tutu did not only raise the questions around apartheid as a system of violence that negated the dignity of Black people, but he also asserted that it negated the perpetrators and white supremacists who benefited or were benefactors of such a system politically, economically, but also in the educational system. As our alumni, we find it important that the types of leaders and students that we produce in the world must be at the center of changing the world, and he epitomizes that. The second aspect that, yes, unless you wanted to ask you, the second aspect that I wanted to state is that when Archbishop Tutu was raising questions around the dignity of Black people in the global arena, whether it's in the divestments against apartheid economic system, or whether it was in the articulation of the Black people as moral agents in the change, but also in the leadership in the democratic systems. He never really received a lot of support except by those who were the victims of apartheid. If you were to remember, he agitated with Margaret Thatcher and others that it was imperative for the United Nations to take seriously the systems, but also the challenges of South Africa. And yet in their speech, they never attended to the idea of South Africa in the context of apartheid as a country that required the United Nations insight and interventions. So this is quite important, that the hypocrisy of systems of governance that never really appreciated the quest and the pursuance for justice becomes a critical area. In the democratic context, Bishop Tutu really agitated for critical solidarity with the African National Congress governance. However, he reiterated that if in the praxis, but also the theory of governance of the African National Congress, that there was going to be a dissonance with a continued support for social justice, for taking seriously the transformation imperatives, that he would actually speak against those. And indeed, he did so. He also called for the support
Professor,
of
unfortunately, we've run out of time. Perhaps just to touch on this other important question, when I was just reading through your statement, you went on to emphasize that he stood with the stigmatized, be it those living with HIV or the poor. This was most importantly when it was not so popular to do so. How important is it for men and women of influence to publicly back important initiatives?
I suggest that it is integral, and it must be at the center of institutions, people, but also all people project. But it is equally important because the rights, human rights or dignity, become a joke if indeed there is dissonance from supporting those on the underside of history, whether they are poor or they are LGBTQIA persons, or they live in conditions of disabilities. It's very important that these are part of the central governance, policy, legislative systems in the country and in the global arena. One of the things that I like about Archbishop Tutu, he never allowed himself to be reduced by party political position, but he stood for overarching commitments to dignity, to transformation of racism, to anti-apartheid, including calling out the global bigots or despots who were actually in solidarity with global systems that continue to manifest in injustice.
Including calling out some of our own leaders here during his time. Thank you very much. That's Unisa Vice-Chancellor Professor Puleng Lenkabula just giving us her insights. Now we